Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. Take a trip into the macabre world of goth modeling in the new millennium in this spooktacular Spinsterella story. Pick up your copy of Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the cool slow, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. I was wondering if Jim Shooter had remained at Marvel, would Marvel be in a much better place today? Now, back in 1987, it was speculated that John Byrne hosted a party at his home in Canada where he burnt Jim Shooter in effigy in a stack of New Universe comics, and this event basically led to the executives who owned Marvel to terminate Jim Shooter, and that termination may have been the catalyst for the decline of the comic book industry. Now, the reason why I speculate it may have been the catalyst for the decline of the comic book industry is because Jim Shooter basically was the man who ran Marvel and made Marvel so competitive it became the number one comic book company in the world and put it in a place where it could basically be the number one comic company that basically became very popular even through the 1990s at the peak of the comic book business. And even after he had been terminated and went over to other companies like Valiant to go and be their editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter was able to maintain a high level of quality as he worked at Valiant, making that company extremely competitive against other companies like Marvel. And what I'm speculating is that maybe if Jim Shooter had remained at Marvel, maybe the company would have been able to weather the storm that came in 1990 when several of its top artists, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, and many others, decided to leave Marvel and go to Image. Now, the formation of Image Comics in 1990 basically shook up the entire comic book industry because we had these creators going from being creators who worked at Marvel on top books such as Spider-Man, X-Force, X-Men, and many other titles to these same creators heading over to start their own company and own their own intellectual properties. And in addition to again these creators leaving Marvel, you had other creators getting opportunities such as Bob Layton, who got the opportunity to work at Valiant. I mean, Marvel basically had an entire creative brain drain due to the growing comic book industry, and sadly it didn't have a editor-in-chief who was able to weather the storm, and that's basically one of the things that I believe led to the complete collapse of Marvel in the mid-90s. Now, as these creators were basically leaving to go out here and create their own IPs, Marvel again was basically a rudderless ship. And some people would say Tom DeFalco was a pretty good editor-in-chief, but when I look at Marvel, I can see a marked decline under DeFalco's leadership because he really didn't keep things as consistent as Jim Shooter did in the 1980s. Now, Jim Shooter in the 1980s ran Marvel as a very tight ship and was looking to maintain a high level of quality, because he understood how the publishing business worked, and he also understood that the publishing business was constantly changing. So what I'm speculating is that maybe if Jim Shooter had stayed at Marvel, maybe Marvel would have been able to weather the storm that basically did a lot of damage to its entire brand in the 1990s when the entire company just fell completely apart, because having a good editor-in-chief basically would have allowed the company to go out here and have someone at the helm who would have been able to understand how the business worked and would have been able to go out here and find competent writers and artists in a changing industry. Now, the comic book industry as the 80s started to end and the 90s started to begin, became a very insular place where people weren't really looking to hire new writers or new artists. And I believe Jim Shooter would have been a bit more open to hiring new, fresh talent, because with the talent leaving Marvel and the talent creating an exodus from Marvel, he would have possibly looked to hire new, fresh voices as related to writing, and he would have possibly looked to hire artists and tried to maintain a house style similar to what Jeanette Kahn was doing at DC Comics. Now, if we look at DC Comics was in a much better place to weather the storm because its editorial under Jeanette Kahn basically kept things consistent. Moreover, Jeanette Kahn also was able to expand DC's brand into the Vertigo imprint and many other imprints, and that was all because she maintained standards such as house style and maintained many of the titles even after the Crisis managed to expand into other areas, including starting the Milestone line. I mean, DC was in a far better place to weather the storm, but Marvel itself basically didn't have that type of leadership, and because they didn't have that type of leadership, what happened with Marvel is that Marvel started to fall completely apart creatively when they decided to change their whole approach to editorial in 1994. Now, in 1994, Marvel basically changed its approach to editorial, putting the X-Men books in with one group of editors, the Hulk with another group of editors, Spider-Man books with another group of editors, Marvel Heroes with another group of editors, instead of having one editor-in-chief basically being over all of the books. They had multiple editors-in-chief, and the results basically were not really good quality. No, this is where Marvel Comics took a precipitous decline in quality, and we started to go from Marvel Comics having their own unique look and having their own unique feel and having a consistent house style to the attempt to try to copy their competitors like Image and basically turn Marvel into Image Light. And as they tried to go out here and copy the extreme designs of Image, what happened with Marvel is that Marvel basically, one, lost its way as a publisher, and two, basically, many of their characters basically lost their way due to bad writers who gave us legendary horrible stories such as the Clone Saga, such as The Crossing, such as Bone Claw's Wolverine, stories that have basically been infamous for just being so horrible because they basically did so much damage to the characters that I mean, they are not remembered in a positive light, but they are remembered as one of the worst times in Marvel history. I mean, when I think of 1994, 1996 Marvel, it's one of the worst periods in the company's history, and next to the early 70s before Shooter came into the company, and 1994, 1996. Again, this was where the comic book industry started to have its decline, and as it started to decline, Marvel, again, which was the industry leader, basically fell into bankruptcy partially due to all of the speculator market falling apart, partially due to many of the books being so bad that nobody wanted to read them anymore, and partially due to the whole stock falling apart due to, again, mismanagement. But I have to wonder, if Jim Shooter were still in charge, would they have been in a better place to weather the storm? That's the question I have been speculating, because when I look at Marvel under Jim Shooter was a tight ship. Marvel under Jim Shooter basically had books that were consistent from the lower tier titles to the top tier titles, and it had a universe of books that anybody could easily follow. Every story was an entry point. Every story basically was easy to read. All the books basically met the same standard in terms of art. All the books basically came out on time consistently so that readers could basically just come in and pick up books. I mean, books under the Shooter era were some of the best comics in terms terms of quality. And as you read them, everything just flows together nicely. And you can pick up any book and basically come into the Marvel Universe without having any sort of difficulty at all. And when I look at Jim Shooter's run on Marvel, I think he possibly would have been the right man to have been running the company into the late 80s and the 90s, and I think he would have been able to handle the exodus of talent such as Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane, and many of the top pencilers and top writers. He would have been able to understand, okay, yeah, the industry is expanding. These people want to go out here and be able to get their own piece of the pie. I think he would have understood that overall, and he would have been continuing to work to give those creators a bigger piece of the pie at Marvel, because that's what he was doing when he was working at Marvel, working to get these artists their art back, working to get them a cut of the profits. But a lot of these artists really didn't like how strict Jim Shooter was. Like guys like John Byrne didn't like how strict he was on schedules and how he wanted to keep the characters consistent. And this is why they wanted to burn him in effigy and then look to get him terminated. But sadly, getting him terminated may have been the catalyst for the whole complete decline of Marvel Comics, the complete decline of Marvel Comics as a brand, because without that editor-in-chief to basically navigate the company through all of the changes that were coming as related to things, basically Marvel wasn't in a place where it could be competitive anymore, because they didn't have an editor-in-chief who had a vision for the company long term. Again, Tom DeFalco was a nice guy, but he wasn't a visionary like Jim Shooter, and I believe a visionary like Jim Shooter would have been looking to, again, deal with the changing comic book market with all of these new competitors such as Malibu, such as Valiant, such as Image, such as Milestone, and companies like Everett Hartso's London Knight. I mean, it would have been out here, he would have had Marvel in a place where it would have been in a much better place to be competitive, and he would have been out on the lookout for that fresh new talent. Again, the comic book industry, it needs, again, an infusion of fresh talent. When you lose a lot of talent, you have to be ready to, again, find new players who want to be in the game. And the whole thing is, Marvel wasn't ready when they lost all their talent. Yeah, they got suitable guys to come in on books like Spider-Man, like Eric Larson. They got the Kuberts to be able to be on X-Men, but the whole thing is the quality of the storytelling wasn't the same, because a lot of these companies really don't focus on their writing. And again, Marvel really didn't do a good job of focusing on its writing, but when Shooter was in charge, he did focus on the writing. He did focus on the storytelling, making sure that it was on point. And again, I believe that if he had remained in charge, maybe Marvel would have been able to weather the storm of Image the same way DC was able to weather the storm of Image under Jeanette Kahn's leadership. Because under Jeanette Kahn's leadership, I mean, yeah, there was a lot of change over at DC in the 90s, but those changes were actually seen very positively. I mean, many people remember Tim Drake Robin and Wally West Flash and Kyle Rayner Green Lantern and Hook Hand Aquaman and Peter David's Supergirl very fondly. They remember many of those books basically as classics from the 20th century, and many of those books basically, again, really are ones that people continue to enjoy to this day. I mean, 90s DC basically had some of the greatest books in the whole medium of comics. When you look at them historically, I mean, even though we had events like Death of Superman and Nightfall, again, those events basically gave us great moments and gave us memorable costumes like the Jim Balent Catwoman. I mean, under the hand of Jeanette Kahn, the leadership at DC, the company remained strong, even with extensions like Milestone and Vertigo. Again, the growth was there, and the thing that basically was the difference between Marvel and DC was that they had that the editor-in-chief remained in her position. I mean, had Jim Shooter, I believe, remained at Marvel, Marvel would have been able to be steady, even with the departure of top artists like Todd McFarlane, top artists like Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, and many others. they would have been able to weather the storm because they would have had a strong leader to guide the ship. And had they had that strong leader to guide the ship, maybe Marvel would have, again, been able to produce way better stories than the stuff like the Cap and the Exosuit, the Teen Iron Man, and stories like the Extreme story as related to the Crossing, and Boneclaw's Wolverine, and other stories that are now considered to be reviled to this day, leading up to the climax of Onslaught, which was meant to try to reset the Marvel Universe from the dysfunction that had been put in place by Marvel editors and Marvel comic writers and artists who were mad at Jim Shooter. And when I look at Marvel, again, I look at the decline of Marvel starting in 1987 with that party that is alleged to have been take place at John Byrne's house as related to burning those New Universe comics, and that plan to again go against the New Universe, actually destroying the Marvel Universe, because without somebody to lead Marvel, basically Marvel's universe basically came to an end in 1996 with Onslaught, and the universe of, again, basically came to an end because the House of Ideas had been run by people creating stupid ideas like Cap in that exosuit, the Teen Iron Man, the Thing with the mask on, again, Wolverine with the bone claws, and Howard Mackey's just nightmare of a Clone Saga. These were the things that took books that were once #1 books and turned them into books that could barely be given away at hospitals. This was what happened when you lost the leadership at Marvel, and basically the entire company fell completely apart. And I have to wonder, if nobody had messed with Jim Shooter, would we still have a Marvel that people actually wanted to buy comics from? Because when I look at Marvel today, it's a sad state of affairs as related to it being a comic book company right now. The company is even worse placed than even before Jim Shooter took over, or all of the dysfunction of 1994 and 1996. Nothing feels like Marvel anymore. It just feels like a company that's basically lost, and I have to wonder if Marvel would wound up on the road to losing its way all the way back in 1987. Now, if you want to check out my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to check out my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for 99 cents, or in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. And if you want to check out many of my stories that I wanted to one day turn into comics in the SJS Direct universe, you can find all of those stories on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online bookstores such as Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and places like big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Pick up your copy of Esteem Season of the Witch Girl in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.